friends, welcome back to my channel. I just finished filming my character vlog for Preptober and I'm too excited to stop working, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump into plotting. I have read Romancing the Beat. I am on the bandwagon. I am in love with it. I'll talk more about it later, but essentially this vlog is going to be all about me plotting my upcoming story. It is a YA fantasy romance about a girl who is going after her lost father by manipulating a pirate captain to get what she wants. But of course, it's not gonna go her way. It is enemies to lovers, and I'm so excited about it.
Silhouettes of you are like a taunt. Never really know just what you want.
Hello, it has been a few days since last we spoke. I think it's maybe been 2 days. I have been working on my plotting. What I have done so far is probably one of the most unorganized systems ever, but I have written on these 4 bits of scrap paper all of the Romancing the Beat beats. Like, I've identified them, written them down. I have a few scene ideas written down on these papers as well. You can see, like, I totally ran out of room, and like I'm writing tiny little, like, illegible notes on the side. So I need to work on my system a little bit, which is why I bought index cards, because today I think I'm going to go ahead and start identifying the Blake Snyder beats, and then also doing like a chapter slash scene breakdown of everything. I also bought this size. I don't think I even realized that these index cards came in larger sizes. So I bought these because they're nostalgic and like what I use. It's like a comfort zone. But then when I noticed this size, I was like, you should probably get those. So judging off of the spacing situation of these notes, I think I am going to go ahead and use the larger ones. And I also picked up this cute gold metallic pen. It's just like a cheap one from this store called Shaggy's. I think it might be local to my area, but it's basically somewhere between a Dollar Tree and like a Walmart or Target. Somewhere in that range of a store. It has like multiple departments and you can find some interesting things. So I hope this works well because I love gold and I think it will add like a little splash to what I'm doing. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hop into an in-depth plotting session and see where we can get today. Welcome to the not so aesthetic side of my basement. I have prepped my little planning picnic. Vibe check, Foxcell soundtrack. I just finished Act 1. I'm super happy with it. I think it might be one of the most entertaining Act 1s I've ever written, but I am starting to hop into Act 2, and this is where my notes get slightly more sparse. Because I'm using Romancing the Beat, she only has 5 beats per quarter, so what I have so far is not enough for a whole quarter of a book. So there's a lot more brainstorming going on right now, so it's halting production, but I'm having so much fun. Good morning, quick check-in. It's a couple days later. I got through the first half of the outlining phase. I've changed a lot of things and added a lot more detail, so I'm happy with that. But the act coming up, Act 2B, is where it's a lot more muddy for me. I have identified all of her beats, but this act in particular seems like it needs a lot more filler scenes than just the beats she has outlined for us. It's gonna take a lot more brainstorming, a lot more time and finessing, and it's interesting because the way she has mapped everything out is this is the act where things are supposed to be taking 2 steps back but still 1 step forward in the romantic relationship. So I'm gonna have to do some playing around with that. I have officially plotted my novel. Super stoked about this. On each card I made sure to include the chapter number, whose point of view it was, and I always start with an opening image. I find this helps me keep my openings visual because if I don't, I'm definitely one of those people that won't hop into a scene in the middle of it. I'll start with like, she walks to the door and opens the door or something like boring like that, unless of course there's like a point to it. So it's just like a little helpful hack for me to keep my chapter openings you know, moving, visual. Like, I try to think of it as a movie and like the actual opening of this scene, like what am I seeing? And like what makes it kind of dramatic. A lot of times it makes it a lot more of a subjective opening because I'm like zoomed in on something and then I kind of zoom out of it. I hope that makes sense. I'm actually following 3 points of views, and for the opening chapter of each character I made sure I wrote their misbelief somewhere on the note card just so that it could be at the forefront of my mind as I work through each scene. And I will say, because I was following Romancing the Beat, this is something she does very intentionally, and it was something that I loved about following her process, was that everything is very inner motivated. She calls it like a hole in your heart character in the beginning, and they're moving towards a whole heart, like W-H-O-L-E, like a full heart, versus a heart that has a missing piece in it. So I really liked that part of following these beats just because it is so internally motivated and character driven, and obviously you want that for a romance, but I feel like it was helpful to do this so that in my next book, like what if my next book isn't a romance? This is kind of a roadmap for any character, even outside of a romance, because you want to make sure that, you know, your character does have that inner motivation, and it's just interesting to see all of the beats that she singled out for this purpose. So I'm actually very excited and curious to see how this structure would play out in a non-romance. Obviously, a lot of the beats wouldn't necessarily work, or you would have to adjust them to where they're not directed towards the love interest. But I definitely think some of them apply, and I think having to do this for a romance will only strengthen your writing. And then of course it's very applicable if you have a love story within your story that is your B story, which is something that I do often. So I think it's very versatile and very insightful, and I love it, in case you know, couldn't tell by now. The only other thing I included on my chapter note cards was sometimes I would write a things to establish, just because I wanted to make sure I was keeping tabs on things that I would have to set up that were going to pay off in later chapters that weren't necessarily huge plot points in the chapter scene that I was writing. So it's just like little things I didn't want to forget, or like a vibe I wanted to feel while I was writing / reading the book. Like, for example, I have a chapter that I wasn't necessarily happy with, so I wrote down the title of a song that I wanted to make sure I was like working towards in the actual writing of the book, because it's like the feeling that I get when I'm listening to that song is like exactly what I want to happen in this chapter, but it wasn't coming through in the outline, and I just wanted to make sure that I remembered the thoughts that I had toward this chapter before I started writing it. This is actually something Gwen Hayes does at the beginning of all of her chapters, is she wrote a playlist for each chapter, like 3 songs I think. Most of them were 80s references, and I was here for that. I actually found that very helpful because I do that in my own process sometimes. I gotta say, as someone who is coming from screenwriting, she also comes from screenwriting, everything she was saying just really clicked for me, and this book is exactly what I needed to write a romance. But the book is still intended for novel writers, and you don't have to have a background in screenwriting to follow this book. In fact, it is incredibly easy to follow, and it's very quick to read. The only other thing I tracked this time on note cards was I have a third point of view that I tracked. I just jotted down my storylines. I have an A, B, C, and D, so I wanted to just have like a quick reference for that. I also tracked a magic arc that happened, and I also took notes of things that were bothering me within the chapters, and as I went along, some of these cleaned up themselves naturally, but some of them didn't, so now I have this to keep with my notes, keep with my plot as I'm working through it. I can keep those items on the forefront of my mind, and as I am filling in the details and actually drafting, I think these things will work themselves out. But if they don't, I already have like the beginnings of what needs to be worked on in the developmental edit stage. One of the visual pictures she uses to describe what you're trying to achieve in writing a romance is that medical symbol with the snakes wrapping around the staff thing, and she was saying like if they were ropes laid out and you would twist them, they would slowly twist and then like they're kissing. And I just kind of love that because it's like that tension of like twisting, but it still brings them together. That was an intriguing image for me. Another thing that I really enjoyed that was kind of specific to her process is she talks about the ebb and flow of the relationship. So in the first part of Act 2 with your scenes, you need to be taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back in their like growing relationship / closeness. And in the second part of Act 2, you're supposed to be taking 2 steps back and 1 step forward. This is definitely something I hadn't thought about before reading this book. I think a lot of times it's easier to go through your external plot and make that kind of become the breaking point for a lot of the beats in your story. And what I loved about following this beat structure was that the external plot just kind of fell into place. One of her beats is a grand gesture beat that happens like in the middle of Act 3. This is like that moment in all the rom-coms when the guy rushes to the airport and stops her from getting on the plane. And she was saying to make it even more impactful, you want to make sure both of your characters have a grand gesture moment. She said like it's not necessary, and you want the person who did the most harm to have the grand gesture moment, but if you can get both of them to have a grand gesture moment, you know, it's like the cherry on top. And I found that that happened naturally just by following her beats and really honing in on my character's misbelief. Like when I got there, it was very easy to incorporate a grand gesture for both of them. And I do think the credit for that does go to following what she already set up for me in the beginning. So that was a lot of fun to see play out. I will say I have 1.5 cons. The half con is that because this is so A-story focused, so like your romance, your A-story, that's all you're getting. So after you read the book and you're so excited to hop into plotting your novel, I think you would benefit by pausing for a moment and thinking about your villain, especially if you have a physical villain, and also a B and C story, because when you're doing this, I do think a B story probably falls into place, but maybe not. So be thinking of that B story, be thinking of that C story, and ways that you can wrap them in to the A story, because you're not going to get that by just following her beats, but you still want to make sure you're weaving those in. That's not really a con on her because she doesn't like promise to deliver that. That's why I called it like a half con. It's just like something to keep in mind, I guess. I do highly recommend reading this book as a companion novel to Blake Snyder's Save the Cat or Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel, because that's going to help you fill in some of those external plot points and some of those B story and C story beats that you don't necessarily get in this book. So I guess that means my only real con is that there were no examples in the book, and I just found myself wanting more with every chapter. Like I said, it's a very short book, which can be a huge pro. You can finish this book in like less than 2 hours, probably for most people an hour, which is good because you can just hop right into plotting your novel. It's like a tool to plot your novel quickly. You can get it done in like a day. I definitely took more time with it than that and dove as deep as I could with it. But as I was diving deep into the beats, I wish that she had dove deeper. I kind of look at it as like she gave us the facts, but she didn't give us the proof of why the facts work. So for me, I needed to prove to myself that this system was going to work. So I watched The Proposal because that is an enemies to lovers with a bunch of manipulation elements to it. So I thought it'd be a good comparison title for me since it's the same tropes. And as I was watching it, I was making sure to identify her beats within the context of the movie, and it worked. And I started thinking about this, and I could see how the beats could be applied to other stories. So like, I know it works, but I wish the book had dove deeper into it, because it would have been very beneficial to have on the page different examples of other stories hitting these beats, because you've got a lot of angles you can play around with when you're trying to hit the beat. So it would have just been perfect to have more references. And so because of that, I do think this book deserves its own case study. Not anytime soon though, you know, because we've got a whole novel to write in November. But I loved it that much. I loved it so much that I think I want to dive even deeper. And I definitely think anytime I'm going to be writing a romance, this book I'm going to be pulling out. Anytime I want to write a B story romance, I'm going to be pulling this book out. And so I guess that's like my big takeaway, is that this was incredibly helpful, incredibly character motivated. And it was a lot of fun to read. She's very spunky. So 10 out of 10, do recommend. I even think if you're not a plotter, definitely if you're a planter, it's still helpful because you can just identify her beats in a single sentence. So you would just have 20 sentences as your outline. So like all of the road mappers and what do they call it? Street light people who just like have like a little thing they're working toward as they write. I think this is brilliant for them. So that is like a little mini review of my take on Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat. I cannot say how much I recommend picking up this book before you plot a romance. I think having everything laid out right in front of you is just kind of invaluable. So I am so excited that people recommended this to me and that I actually picked it up. It is amazing. For everyone that is prepping right now and getting ready for NaNoWriMo, good luck to you. We've got 2 weeks left and we're gonna have so much fun. If you're new here, go ahead and like and subscribe so you can follow along on my Preptober and NaNoWriMo journey. I'm gonna go ahead and link the playlist down below. I'm also here every Friday with writing related videos, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye!